Hello, everyone, and welcome to the New View podcast. My name is Mac.
And my name is Megan.
Come along with us as we dive into the world of competitive Irish dancing and beyond,
sharing perspectives, developing community, and learning from each other.
We hope you enjoy.
Welcome back to New View. Mac and I are super excited to be chatting today again. Last week we covered just kind of updates in our lives, what we've been up to. I retired from competing and have been into some school research and working out a bit more. And Mac has passed her TCRG, is teaching lots, working on her dissertation, and just kind of navigating life with not having the structure of the competition schedule. And this week, we're just going to dive more into that and be real with you throughout this journey. So we're excited to be here.
Yeah, I think this episode's going to be kind of fun because I think we both have a bit of an idea in mind of where we'd like to see New View going. And I think that'll evolve, but for sure we want that to include some very real, honest conversations as I think we have up to this point, but just being honest and genuine about the challenges that we've faced and that are, common in our world, whether that's competitive dancing or transitioning out of competitive dancing and being in a new role, or maybe that's just an entirely different sport. I think it's really important to talk about the tough stuff and yeah, just inspire and encourage honest conversations around this kind of thing. So as we kind of just mentioned in our last episode, we talked about some of the bigger life updates that we've each had. And I guess a similarity between the two of us is that we're both now not actively competing anymore and just sort of navigating life, a life that's not dictated by the competition schedule as much. And I think one area that I really wanted to chat about today, and it's very relevant to me, is sort of just talking about this idea of, and I just feel like it's sort of this common idea I've heard it a lot throughout the course of my life that, competitive athletes or like elite performers, they develop these amazing skills and, whether that's skill specific to their sport or whatever, but it's this idea that they develop these skills that they can just automatically translate into other areas of their life, and then they're just automatically high performers in other areas as well right away. And while I think, to some extent that is maybe very true for some people, and I think that's awesome, I personally have been struggling with that, and I found that challenging because I know that there's skills that I have as a competitive dancer and that like in certain arenas have really served me, but I have struggled to apply those skills in other contexts. So I think that's a interesting topic that would be kind of useful to dive into today.
Absolutely. And I think, that shows up for me too as I'm transitioning out of competitive dance into normal life or however we want to define that. And I would say the biggest thing that like pops up for me when you say that, well, many things come up, but a large aspect of that is just like the general competitive nature that you find yourself in when you're competing in a high level sport and you're used to that environment. When you're no longer in that environment, it's hard to participate in like active things or exercise, I find, in a way that's just like relaxing or fun or less competitive. I think being competitive can be fine and great, and you can strive to want to be the best, but I find myself sometimes in yoga, like wanting to be quite competitive or not enjoying workouts as much because I wasn't the fastest runner or anything like that. Does that show up for you at all now as you're like having less competitive activities, I guess, in your life?
Interesting. Yes and no. I think it does show, I just knowing you, I think that it's more prevalent for you. than it is for me. I've been quite intentional with the way I've approached, and don't get me wrong, I'm competitive too, and I like to sort of do high intensity stuff. But like for with running, for example, I was quite intentional with that because I started running while I was still dancing. And so I always had running was kind of just this physical activity outlet that I didn't want to be sort of like an assessed part of my life. Um, I don't really like to know my splits. I don't like to know, like it's kind of interesting to know how far I've run. And sometimes I like to do that, but not as much as I think it is for you. Which I think is just cool to note that it's like different for different people. Um, I'm curious, like, do you think though, how have you, I don't know, worked on that? Like, clearly you're aware of it, so.
Yeah, I would say I'm definitely very aware of it. Sometimes it absolutely gets the better of me in that I will let a bad workout ruin my entire day. But I will say that was kind of something I struggled with in dance as well. Like I struggled to let a less than amazing practice just go. It meant a lot to me when something went really, really well and when it didn't go well. Um, and that's something I know has been like quite hard for me for a long time. So that does just show up in like regular workouts. Like today, I did not run as fast as I normally do, and that like just frustrated me because I know I've been at a point physically where I've been so strong and could perform at a consistent high level. And that's just something I feel very proud of, like to have done in my life. Um, and I'm less skilled, I would say, than you in terms of giving myself just a little bit of patience or accepting the fact that, like, first of all, not everything is a competition and not every day is good or your best. So it's definitely still something I'm working on, but I try to be aware of it as much as possible. And I'm really trying to make like physical activity something that's just fun because dance for me was very fun, right? And I don't want to make all of these other choices of movement not fun simply because it's not dance, right? So I try to find ways that I can draw parallels between the two. Like I loved getting to know people at dance and making friends and stuff. So I'm putting myself out there to like talk to random people at the gym and like create that same kind of community so that, yeah, maybe I still want to push really hard and I'm kind of competitive at heart and maybe that'll never go away, but I'm creating more reasons to be at the gym and working out besides a desire to be my very best every single day. I just want to participate in something with a group and feel connection and enjoy being with each other.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that that's a really nice way of going about it, and you're clearly doing it. Like I said, you're clearly aware, and then intentional with how you're handling it in the sense of like, okay, I can see that I'm falling into this pattern of, being, quite competitive, and if it doesn't go as I think it should, then it can kind of ruin my day. But I guess stopping yourself and going, hey, like there's other elements of dance even that I enjoyed that weren't the competitive part. And, where are those elements in this other context that I find myself in? And how can I refocus on those things as well? Sorry, just to circle back a little bit, this kept coming up in my mind as you were talking. I'm sure you would be familiar with these terms as well, but I'm not sure that everybody listening would be. So I can maybe talk about them just briefly. But perfectionism is a very common thing in dancers in general. And there's different sort of ways of concept, like types of perfectionism that we've sort of been able to, I guess, construct and identify and recognize. So I guess there's perfectionism, and then there's like perfectionist concern and perfectionist striving. And perfectionistic concern is when, like you cannot handle, a performance that you've given that is like below par for, or below like a certain level for yourself that you're holding yourself to. Whereas perfectionistic striving is more of like a real driven by passion. Like I just really want to do this to the very best of my abilities. And it's a bit less of like a I'm trying to like avoid not doing it to the best of my abilities. I'm just kind of like inspired by that possibility. Um, and I do find that fascinating in terms of the extent to which that is somebody's like characteristic, like inherent to them, and how we can work on that. The more we know it, like we know it and see it in ourselves. Um, I think that's something that is funny about me. I think it's funny, in that I don't like to do things not well. I get embarrassed and I'm like, well, I get nervous to try something new that I know I'm not going to be good at or whatever. But like even in dancing, I don't think I really had a ton of like perfectionistic concern. Like I didn't have a ton of like if this isn't perfect. Like, I was able to kind of let it go. Like it might frustrate me in a moment and it would bother me in a moment, but then I was able to let it go. And I think maybe that's something that's been helpful for me. I definitely have other challenges, but for me, in terms of like working out and exercise, that's been useful. I don't know, like what do you think of that? And do you notice that in yourself?
For sure. And I knew of that as something that was very present in my dancing. So I did expect it to follow me into other areas in life, but it's definitely surprised me a bit that, or the extent to which it can show up and feel so important or weighted, if that makes sense. And
Well, I
just
have a
hold
question.
some importance in your life that it maybe doesn't need to.
Yeah. Well, no, so I have a question. Do you think like now that like when you were also still competing and dancing, do you think that I guess trait sort of was with you as much in other contexts while you still had dance going on? Or is it like now it's more there in other areas because it's not in dance as much, or like you don't feel it in dance?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's a foundational part of my personality, I would say. So it's not necessarily going anywhere and hasn't ebbed or flowed quite a lot. It's been very consistent. But I will say I find it showing up more in other places now that I'm no longer dancing, because that was something I used as kind of like a gift in dancing. It really drove me to be a hardcore practicer and like be really good at fixing corrections and always in the studio and like working so much that it was almost a superpower. Now it's more of a hindrance, I would say. Um, because I don't have that outlet to kind of work through it, or I haven't found my next outlet really to work through it.
Hmm.
Because dancing was it for me. So now it definitely shows up more in a lot of areas of my life, whether that be working on school research or working out in the gym or running in a race. Like it definitely shows up a lot more. So I think that's definitely something I'll keep in mind. And it's just interesting to think about too, how that has occupied your life.
Totally. I don't think it's maybe something that you need to fix or like work on or sort out, I guess, overnight. But even just maybe yeah, maybe you do start to kind of figure out like what are the areas that I can sort of have my like real perfectionistic like needs met sort of, and then maybe
Hmm.
you have other areas where you're like, I'm like learning to practice just like acceptance and like letting it just be what it's going to be or whatever it is for you. It's just an interesting sort of dial to play with as you shift your focuses and stuff in life. I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Didn't know we were going to go down that rabbit hole, but here we are. Fun. Um, I guess one thing for me that I've found challenging is really like, I guess it kind of piggybacks off that last topic, but having a growth mindset in the sense of not being afraid to try things and not be good at them. Um, I've started doing hot yoga, but to be honest, I wasn't that scared of not being very good at it because I knew my background in dance would, set me off on like a
Support
decent,
me. Yeah.
yeah, like I'm gonna be all right at it. But I definitely in things that sort of matter to me, but I'm afraid to do them, like school stuff. Um, it matters a lot to me, but I feel very much like a fish out of water, and I know it's frustrating in the back of my mind. I know I have good work ethic and good skills that I've built through dancing and my academics previously, but I do get frustrated in moments when I just feel like, I hit a wall with some prob challenge or whatever that I'm doing in my studies or whatever, and uh, it occurs to me that I'm like, if I was in a similar situation in a dancing context, I wouldn't shy away from this. Like, I would feel confident to like keep trying even if I got it wrong or whatever. Whereas I feel like I hit this just like a block and I really struggle with it. Um, so I don't know if that's something that other people have experienced too, but it frustrates me because I feel like I should be able to push past it. And I know that I'm having a fixed mindset about it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think that kind of fits the narrative we often hear that you were mentioning at the top of the episode that, you have all these great skills for from being competitive and being a champion and being at the top of your game, like you're going to be a high achiever in all you do. And you're like, oh, I hope and I know I have those good, hardworking skills, but at times when it fails to transfer or has not quite gotten there yet, we haven't just developed the skills, it feels like more of a failure than it is. And
Mhm.
with, I don't know how to put that, but that's how it feels to me. Like, oh, I know I have these great skills. Like, why is it not working? Like, things do not compute. And it's not, I don't think it's because we lack the skill. I think skills that we've developed in dancing or in sport are transferable, but it's that process of, maybe ending dancing or your sport and kind of beginning a new chapter of life where you have to rework those skills a little bit and reapproach them and work on your mindset of how you use them to begin with. Because, yes, you have great hard work ethic. That's
Mhm.
awesome. But that's not going to show up for you the same way it did with going to the studio 6 or 7 days a week. It might take other things for that same kind of work ethic to develop with your dissertation or things like that. And I think it's easy to get frustrated when the narrative is just, oh, but that should transfer great, you know? You're like, well, it doesn't. So what do I do now? And then you
It's
just
not
are
necessarily going to
left
be
in the
seamless.
no,
Totally.
no. But and in that lack of seamlessness comes massive frustration. And then
Yeah.
I often find myself like, oh, why did I even like stop? I was like good at this. I knew my strengths when I did this. Like, what am I doing now? I don't know what my strengths are. When it's
Mhm.
not as if they've entirely gotten up and walked away and disappeared. They're just hidden a bit more in the new domain, right?
Totally. I've just been thinking of an analogy, and I think it's not a perfect analogy, but maybe worth sharing. I know I've said this to you before, but um, I've found that I can do like a pretty hard dancing workout, like what most people would be like, yeah, that's pretty challenging, and the next day not be sore at all, like be like totally fine. Whereas I can also do like a 20-minute weird random Pilates workout that I found on YouTube that maybe didn't even feel that challenging in the moment, but it leaves me the next day like I can barely walk. Like, and I think it's interesting because it's like, well, I know I have the muscles. Like I'm just using them in a different way. And that's what makes it. more challenging. Like that's what makes it a harder workout, which I think is maybe kind of an analogy here. It's like you've got the skills, but you're learning to apply them in a different way. And so that's where like that extra resistance kind of comes in. And I guess what I would even add to that is I was listening to this other podcast yesterday and it was really talking about the importance of like coming up against resistance in your life. Like if you never come up against resistance, there's no opportunity for growth. And so I think too, it sometimes when you're in the middle of the resistance, it's like, this is uncomfortable. I don't want to be feeling like this. I just want to be in my stride, like feeling confident and great, like I did when I was at the top of my game dancing and feeling like I was on top of the world. Like that's where I'd like to be, obviously. But if we can all remind ourselves, especially myself included, that the growth is happening in the resistance. Like if it didn't feel uncomfortable, if it didn't feel hard, if it didn't feel scary, you know, that probably means you're not growing. You're probably not evolving. And I think we all, at the heart of it, crave evolution and personal growth and development. You don't want to stay the same your whole life, but you know,
And I think too, a large part of it is, just like you said, you spent your whole life developing these skills and you have these skills, your muscles have these capabilities, to use your analogy, but you might be forgetting the fact that it took you 10, 15, 20 years to develop those muscles, and now you've got them, and that's great. But to use them in a new way, no, it probably won't take 5, 10, 20 years.
hope not.
But it'll take some time. It'll take some time, right? To use
Yeah.
those same skills again. You might already know how to work really hard, but it's not an overnight process. And I forget that often. Like,
Mhm.
oh, I already know how to be committed to something. Like, why do I suck at this?
Yeah.
It's it's not gonna happen overnight just because I have the skill on paper, right? I gotta practice it and train it in the same way I spent years building my foundation off of, So I think that's a crucial part for me to remember too. Not
Yeah.
just a message for everyone else. It's important for me to say, hey, this is going to take time and not to deter myself because that can definitely be um hard to think about when you're lacking motivation or kind of down on yourself to begin with to be like, oh, it's going to take so much time. But I would view it almost as just kind of reworking your foundation. You already have a whole foundation built. All you got to do is make a few edits and go from there. So the building process will be likely far less than it was the first time, right? It's established
Totally.
and you can build off of what you already have. But again, this isn't an overnight process, and having some level of patience with yourself and your body and your mind is more important than I realize during this
Totally.
whole thing.
No, I second all of that. I think you're right. Just to shift this slightly, but it's definitely in the same vein. Um, I think part of it sometimes that I struggle with, and I think it requires patience, is, with dancing, the goal, like there was just always such a passion like associated with the goal, and like the goal was such like an emotionally charged vision, you know? And I think a lot of dancers can relate to that, whether your goal is winning the worlds or winning your Oireachtas or qualifying for something. Like I think when you're in it to a certain extent, like that goal is so emotionally charged and that it can be so energizing and so fueling and it just is an important ingredient in the whole thing. Um, and I absolutely am pursuing things that I'm passionate about and that I'm very interested and care about. Uh, but if I'm just being dead honest, they don't have that same emotional like charge to them the way my dancing goals always did. And that is hard. That's hard to me. And I I'm still hopeful that like it's again, like you said, just going to take some time. I know I have the capacity to feel that way about something. Um, but it does feel like a bit of a void at the moment. And I don't know if you can relate to that as well, or speak to that, but yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's for me, I would describe it as kind of like a disheartening process to realize, oh my gosh, like dancing filled me up so much and frankly, I don't have anything else like it. Like I don't I'm very passionate about other things in life, but nothing fulfills me in the way that I had been fulfilled in the pursuit of like my dance goals and dreams. And I'm lucky enough to have had those to begin with, but it does leave you, like you were saying, with a massive void in terms of, okay, like what's my next thing? You find yourself kind of scrambling to find like anything really where you can put some passion into, right? Even if it like is silly on paper and doesn't really mean much. I am definitely someone who kind of like chronically seeks passion in lots of ways where I'm like, what am I doing? This is a waste of time. But all of a sudden, when you make the choice to step away from your sport or your thing that provides you with that passion, that purpose to like get up, get out of bed, do your thing, work really hard, what you're dreaming about, when that changes or you no longer have that and you step away, you are left kind of empty. And I think that's really hard to realize. And I think really it can come from a few different perspectives. It's very hard, yes. And you can kind of go two ways from there. You can choose to be someone who's like chronically seeking passion, like I can be at times, looking for any kind of activity that you can pour your heart and soul into, which is amazing. That's awesome that you're so willing to find that. But you can also be someone who just kind of is at a neutral or low point for quite a while until you find what this next thing is. Because you and I have spent most of pretty much our entire lives doing this one thing, and now we
Mhm.
no longer do it. So we're left with that void. How do you fill it? Likely we're not going to find it in the next 6 weeks, right? It's not a quick short-term thing. And even just saying that out loud and like admitting that to myself is like, oh, that's hard. I don't want to hear that because it does feel hard to, honestly, you'll even just wake up in the morning and be like, oh, how do I have to like rush and get out the door to practice before I have to go to school or go to work? So, like, what am I gonna do now? And oh, like my whole weekend isn't structured around these practices and things. So, like, I guess I have time on my hands. Like, what do I do now? It leaves you with a ton of freedom, which can be amazing, but can also be a really good breeding ground for just like wallowing and feeling quite down, honestly.
Yep. Yep. I can feel all of that for sure. I think too, yeah, I think you're so right, actually, in the sense of like, yeah, you can seek out that super passionate feeling in other things. And it's also okay to just be content for periods of time.
Mhm.
Um, like just
And it's
seek out.
okay to be lost too, right?
Yeah.
I would define myself as definitely lost right now in terms of seeking my next passion or finding it. I'm not really quite in the content phase of looking, and I'm
Yeah.
not super like chronically doing lots of activities to try and fill that. I'm definitely in the looking around, this is hard phase, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, weird thought. Sorry, just weird thought as you were saying that. But I feel that you and I maybe fit into a similar category in the sense of, there's kind of the perception sometimes, it's not always true, but sometimes when kids are really just kind of naturally talented at something from the start. Like they don't have to work that hard at it. They don't necessarily develop the same work ethic for something as the kid who's maybe a little less talented at it, but just like really loves it and works hard at it. And the one with who develops the work ethic, tends to sort of like have greater longevity or like maybe come out on top or whatever. I a little bit feel like in some ways, passion came so easy to me. Like I didn't have to try hard to
Yeah,
find
you
passion.
liked it from the
Like
start.
yeah, I just kind of fell into it very early in my life and like how lucky. Like I didn't have to develop the skill of working on passion. Does that even make sense?
Yeah, you
But
didn't even have to seek it out. It was already,
no,
you
it
were
just
lucky
fell
enough to
right
just
into my
have
lap.
it.
Yeah, it just fell into my lap essentially. Like well, there it is. Okay, I'm doing that. Like it was not really like it just happened. And so I'm wondering, maybe like we're just at a point and maybe other people are feeling this too, or maybe you're at a different point in your dancing journey and this is somehow relevant, but it's like you kind of got to work on developing a passion sometimes. Like sometimes that can take a bit of work too. Um, and
Yeah, and
maybe
you can
not always
use
just gonna
your
fall into your lap.
hard-working skills that you developed in Irish dance. This is I'm making a full circle here for both of us and our
Whoa.
listeners. We can use maybe some of our skills we've developed in the process of Irish dance to say, okay, how am I going to be good at having a passion? How am I going to learn to like live a structured life again? You know? How am I going to find my next thing that I just love? And I was there before, so I know I can get there again and feel that way. And those
Mhm.
muscles are in me, but I got to work on them and I got to give it time. And I don't know. That's the first time I've ever actually thought about that and kind of impressed with myself. But I don't know. I kind of like that as an analogy to say, okay, let's like practice passion in the same way we went to the studio every single day, right?
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes it falls into your lap and sometimes you gotta create it a little bit. Um, which I think that's nothing wrong with that. That's kind of cool. Passion can happen a lot of different ways. Um, well, I like that. Well, fun. I think that's a nice thought to end on, to be a parting thought. But no, I've enjoyed this conversation. It's been a bit cathartic, I would say. I hope others have
Absolutely.
enjoyed listening to our ramblings. Yeah, I just before signing off want to say, if there's topics that people would like to hear us talk about or different people that you'd love to hear, chat through their stories on this podcast, please send us a message or let us know. We are all ears for the types of things you guys want to hear about because we want this to be relevant and useful for people tuning in. So, thanks for this chat, Megan. It's been a good one.
Thanks. See you guys soon.
Thanks for joining us in this episode of the New View podcast. We hope you enjoyed.
If you have any ideas about future guests we should interview or want to connect, you can find us on Instagram at newview.collective or email us at newviewcollective.mm@gmail.com.